What you're saying is I overplayed my hand and stated the case too strongly.
I'm just interested. I want to hear you argue with your own devil.
Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
So Alistair Begg, some of you may know him as a very gifted preacher.
Well, he's got that Scottish accent on the radio, so...
If you have the Scottish accent, you just instantly, your credibility shoots through the roof. So my dad really did me a disservice in not imparting his Scottish accent to me. So I will always carry a chip on my shoulder for that. All right. Thanks, Dad. Back to Begg. So Alistair Begg finds himself in deep waters here. He's been canceled actually off of, I think was it a radio program canceled him?
Yeah.
So Alistair Begg is canceled. Let's start there. That's a big deal. A conservative, reformed pastor, usually fairly uncompromising in what he says. So that's surprising. So what's happened is an old podcast he did, I think it was a podcast he did a little while ago, was unearthed where he answered a grandmother's question about whether she should attend her grandchild's gay wedding. And she made it clear that she did not support gay marriage, that this was known to her grandchild. I'm not sure whether this was her grandson or her granddaughter, but that this was known. Okay. So her granddaughter knew this. They were on the same page there. She was going just out of support for her granddaughter because she loves her. And he said, that's fine. And then language, all hell broke loose. So we thought we would talk about that. Not surprisingly, John MacArthur and people like that also removed him from the list of speakers at conferences. To my mind, no big loss there. But that's another matter. So this question has been catapulted to the forefront again, but also the question of whether his cancellation was justified here. So I think, to my mind, Nathan, there are two questions as we talk about this. You can bring in more if you want, but the one has to do with whether one attends a gay wedding or a wedding in circumstances where one has serious disagreements, theological disagreements. And the second is whether his canceling him was justified. So I think that might be a fruitful start.
Yeah, let me just one little tidbit before we get into that. So we're living in an interesting time when we use the word somebody was canceled, because Alistair Begg is going to be fine. I mean, he's a pastor of a church. He has a whole lot of other outlets. So I think the radio program certainly is a blow to those who have listened to him for many years. And, but all of us at some point are going to be canceled or disinvited from somewhere or something for something that we believe, or we're just not talking about it publicly enough so that people know where we disagree with him. So you kind of have to have, I think if you're, a young person listening to this, you won't be able to appease the whole world. So don't put all of your eggs in one basket, I think, or put all of your eggs in the basket of the people who know you and love you and that you're in community and Christian fellowship with. That's the spot where you should care what people think. That being said, I think if you do have a public platform and voice, it's worth being clear on what you think about these things. So let's jump into it on Cameron's 2 points then. So here's I think the Russell Moore article in Christianity Today is helpful on this, of saying you're going to have people who look at weddings and marriages in separate ways coming from Christian convictions. And he would say, it's very hard to doubt Alistair Begg's conservative Christian evangelical credentials just based off of his lifetime of ministry and the firm lines he's drawn on many things, including in opposition to gay marriage. So the trick here is the advice that he gave, and he would say he was speaking in a compassionate pastoral role to this grandmother who is in turmoil about what to do. And I think the part that Russell Moore lays out nicely that I would affirm is to say, you're going to have people who look at this in two ways. One is you're going to say, look, okay, maybe I don't agree with this, and maybe this isn't my definition of marriage or what a wedding is, but I'm really going to do deep damage and offending the people if I don't attend this. And so it's worth it to me, even though I don't support it, to go ahead and go along with this. You have a second group of people who say, whoa, hang on a second. the entire theological structuring and content of what I believe to be true about a marriage is being warped here. And my participation is not as an audience member, but I am part of the formation of a covenant before God. And so if you see, which, and I fall in this category of seeing everybody attending the wedding as part of the officiant of the wedding, many people have pointed out, we still have remnants of this concept when, if you've heard an officiant of a wedding say, does anybody here have a reason why this couple shouldn't be wed or something like that? Only know one person who is actually objected at a wedding during that time. But the idea
Wow.
being that everybody there is part of blessing what's happening, and there's an excitement to it. So Russell Moore's point was also interesting there. He said he never officiates a wedding where people write their own vows, because he says, this isn't your wedding. This is our wedding.
Yeah.
We're all part of this thing that is happening. It's not, I don't go to a wedding as a spectator. I go as part of forming the covenant community before God around what is happening. So you can see immediately there the differentiation of what people are thinking is happening, and how there could be confusion of somebody like, oh yeah, I'm just going to support them. And the other person's but like, yeah, that's like going to a soccer game where they're going to use their hands the whole time. Like, it doesn't even make sense as a concept. And do you really want to go and support and participate in this total wrecking of your whole concept of what this event actually is? So I just want to lay those two things out there to say that people have either no real thoughts and feelings about it, like it's just a warm fuzzy, you feel good and go celebrate, love is love. And the other is like, no, when you participate in this, you're monkeying with something far deeper, and you're giving assent to a very recent change in the definition of what we mean by the concept wedding and marriage. So that I think gives some perspective and balance on why people come at this from different angles.
Absolutely. And just to put my cards on the table, I would not attend a gay wedding. It's a matter of conscience for me. It's a matter of theological conviction. I can't personally make a meaningful distinction between supporting a friend and lending my tacit endorsement. So, and for the reasons that you outlined as you were speaking as well. And also, were I a minister, were I ordained, I also wouldn't officiate at weddings where the couple had written their own vows either. So just to state that for the record. Now, that said,
there you go, all you aspiring poets. Don't call Cameron.
That's right. I'm sorry. I'm sure you're real creative, but that's not the place for it. The work's already done for you. It's been done for you. You can save yourself the effort. But should we cancel? Should Alistair Begg have been canceled? I'm just using the popular parlance. Everything you've said is right, Nathan. He'll be fine. He's got a vibrant church, and let's face it, he's a highly gifted. He's one of the more gifted preachers out there. He'll be just fine. But you get what I'm saying. Should he have been? Sure. Should he have been taken off the air? That kind of thing. So let's talk about that. So in a word, no, I don't think he should have been. But let me play devil's advocate for a second, because I think that will help us. I think part of what we want to do here as a service to all those listening, and for, to ourselves, is to kind of process through this together and see where we end up. So let's play devil's advocate for a second. The concern, I think, let me just state it in a way that I think is respectful to those who think he should be canceled. This concern is that Alistair Begg is capitulating to the zeitgeist and to a cultural mood that is making a mockery of marriage, and marriage is sacred. And also, I think the concern would be that he's capitulating to habits that are currently tearing our society apart, in the sense that they are directly undermining the family. And of course, the basic unit of a functioning society is the family. When the family disintegrates, a civilization crumbles. So, I mean, I'm stating the matter strongly, but I want to also say that these are very legitimate concerns. And Nathan, you mentioned this earlier. If you're a person of some stature, if you've got some level of notoriety, well, then you are an ambassador and a spokesman for the church, and your words carry more weight. So,
I mean, even the New Testament has that warning about the teachers being judged more harshly. So this is not a new territory.
Exactly. And so, and I don't think we take those passages seriously enough, those of us. I mean, they really are sobering. And so, yeah, the argument could also go, this is a minister of God who's attained, by God's grace, quite a bit of notoriety for the right reasons for the most part. And here he is compromising on one of these key issues of our day. Not that sex is everything, but sexuality is a key issue of our moment right now. And for some people, this constitutes a full-fledged crisis. So what on earth is he thinking, saying these consoling words, trying to make somebody feel, I don't know, trying to make the gospel more emotionally palatable when he should be kind and speak truthfully rather than just consolingly. So there's the devil's advocate for you. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Nathan.
But is that the devil's advocate, or is that like so it's an opposite perspective of what actually happened? No, I don't know if devil's advocate works in this situation, because you're making a pretty good case from a historical, biblical, theologically conservative. I mean, what you're
saying is I overplayed my hand and stated the case too strongly.
I'm just interested. Well, I want to hear you argue with your own devil.
Sure, I'll argue with the devil. All right, so I have some clear sympathies with everything that I just stated. Nevertheless, I think part of the problem today is that we're not allowing serious disagreements into our I suppose our public spaces. So in this case, we're talking about a Christian minister. So is there, I suppose then the question then is, Nathan, is there room for different perspectives on, so if this would be, let me put it this way. Now it sounds like I'm sort of wobbling around here. No, I think he should not have been canceled. I still agree with just about everything I said before, but I think he should not have been canceled. Now, my tune would be completely different, Nathan, if he came out in support of gay marriage. He did not. And it's very clear where he stands on that matter. That's not in dispute. So the essential matter of whether, of what marriage is, the definition of marriage is not in question with Alistair Begg. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, I do think there's room here for some disagreement.
I was laughing.
Let me leave it there and hand it over to you.
Yeah, well, so there's a sense here in which Alistair Begg finds himself in the position of the Pope, who's like, yeah, well, sacramental marriage is one thing, but you can bless a union. So there's some muddying of the water there on a lot of spectrums. But so here's the thing: you're saying the challenge is we can't live we struggle to live in a time in which there can be meaningful disagreement. However, that is the issue that the grandmother is worried about with her granddaughter, right? So either I do exactly what she wants, or our relationship gets canceled. That's the fear. So the reason that I don't want to disagree with somebody is that I'm afraid of the social consequences, which we all do this on various forms of saying. The reason that this issue is prickly is because if you want to be consistent about it, you have to think robustly about a lot of other categories, all the way down to, in the New Testament, like, don't even eat with the sexually immoral person who calls themselves a brother or sister in Christ. So it's a much bigger ball of wax than most people realize they're grabbing hold of when they get there. So I think that to me, there's a parallel difficulty there of saying, look, I don't want to isolate a relationship, and so I'm going to go along with their wishes, even if it's against my conviction, because fundamentally, I don't believe that if I disagree with this person, that we can still have a relationship. Now, I think that's the false dilemma that's set up here, because I have seen, and it is difficult, but I have seen people who very much love people who are being married in a same-sex situation who say, we've been friends a long time, or they're a family member or something, and say, hey, look, you know me, you know what I believe to be true about what marriage actually is, and I'm not coming to your wedding, and you're not surprised because you knew how I was going to respond to that in advance, and I'm going to cheer for you in life and continue to encourage you and be your friend. But I don't think you want to invite me to do something that you would feel like is a violation of my conscience because so I guess being aware of those very difficult and real conversations in the past that have not led to the collapse of the relationship, it seems like we have an opportunity here to model this I can disagree with you without canceling the relationship kind of thing. So I'm saying that can happen from the grandmother's perspective, but can also happen on Alistair Begg's what we do with the grandmother, what we do with the granddaughter, and what we do with Alistair Begg. I'm looking for a thread of continuity here on saying what are the points at which we can disagree, do something different, but continue the relationship.
And let's be honest. Is he going to, I mean, what percentage of the time does Alistair Begg address this issue in his daily speaking ministry that airs on the radio? I'm willing to bet never. It's probably never. Right. So part of it's worth looking at the circumstances surrounding this cancellation, somebody finding or coming across or likely digging up an old podcast and then finding this, supposed dirt and saying, ha ha, here, now we got you. And I'm very tired of these antics because they happen so often. You could go through, part of that is just the nature of the online world. I mean, it never goes away. There's a record of everything that you've said or done. And so,
we better get used to it, Cameron. We recorded 3,000 minutes of content last year. I mean, obviously somewhere in that we've offended or said something that 25 years from now or 25 minutes from now is going to be a massive problem. So,
which I'm very grateful you brought up because it reminds me of something that we've said before. We once devoted an entire episode to this. We should probably do it again. And that is to talk about the right to be, I don't know, you don't like rights language. We need to allow for people to be wrong. We're going to get stuff wrong. And part of our, very stringent,
if we're expecting people to grow,
pharisaical cultural. Yes. If we're expecting people to grow, moral growth, of course, any kind of growth is going to necessitate failures, moral growth as well. And moral growth necessitates moral failures where we get things wrong. So once again, I hear the argument. I've tried to state it as strongly as possible, so much so that everything else I'm going to say is probably self-defeating at this point, according to Nathan. But, I do think he is a minister of the gospel. His words carry serious weight. We need to weigh them carefully. I think he made a mistake in what he said here. I maintain he should not be canceled for that. We can get things wrong. And also, I think let me let you.
So let me make this worse. Let me make this more difficult. Here's what's at the bottom of this is we live in a system that celebrates the separation of church and state. But marriage is the one spot that we have never been able to untangle properly in the United States.
That's right.
And so when somebody performs a wedding, oftentimes the minister will say, by the power invested me as a minister of the gospel in the state of fill in the blank, I pronounce you husband. So you have the religious ceremony and the whatever the law of the civil union is at the time in that state trying to be the same thing. And it's been very obvious, I think, in the last 10 years that those are not the same thing. So we're using the same word for two very different things. And you get into these some of you will talk, or, I've talking to a Hindu person about how they feel about other people doing yoga. Drives them nuts. They would say, how dare you take something that's sacred and this meaningful to us spiritually, and then use our word for some woman in New York City in tights saying namaste to, people on a YouTube video.
Yeah.
They're like, how would you feel if every time I bathed my kid, I called it baptism, or every time I gave my kid juice and crackers, I called it communion? That would be a clear crossing of you taking our religious language and then trying to make it into something that helps you stretch or feel better. And so there's this deep offense at kind of a Western accommodation of a religious concept that people then try to say, well, it doesn't really mean that. I just mean it this way. And so I think you get Christians who feel that also, of saying, what are you talking? Like, why are you using religious language or trying to use this terminology in order to, so I don't want to play the cultural appropriation card.
Yeah, the
here.
word,
I'm just saying,
I was going to say the word is appropriation. Yeah.
Yeah. But so I think what's happening is we're living at a time in which the religious language around marriage has dropped so far out of the picture that the majority usage of the term is non-religious now. But you do have a group of people who are still using it in a religious way. Even now, it's basically a tax status category according to your local government. So part of it is when you're making a choice about what do you attend, you're also making a deep statement about how you define what the term itself actually is.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, that's very serious. I want to draw a little comparison here to another cancellation that we talked about recently, because I think what's similar here is that this was again a matter of very serious controversy, and a speaker said what he wasn't supposed to say. And this was Calvin Robinson at the Mere Anglicanism conference. And now he didn't realize, he said in hindsight, that he was stumbling into the major bone of contention in the Anglican Church in North America. But he made some very, I would say, crystal clear remarks on female ordination, and then found himself canceled after that. So I'm saying Alistair Begg shouldn't be canceled for the same reason that I think Calvin Robinson shouldn't have been canceled at that conference. I think that he brought a very, so he had a very well articulated perspective on an extremely contentious issue, but this was a Christian conference. This was a perfect venue for hashing this out. And his voice was silenced, and he would have brought some vital perspective to the panel that he was supposed to have sat on. Now, similarly here, I think Alistair Begg, he's you can go look at his response. He's got a response to all of this. He's a smart, forward-thinking guy, and he has public reasons for what he said. He's a great public communicator, and he's very clear in his thoughts. So, I mean, again, there are some distinctions to be made. If he were calling into question the very definition of marriage, I think this would be a different matter. That's not what he was doing. So because of that, I do think there is room on this matter of attendance of a gay wedding. I'm very clear on where I stand. I think there's room at the table for other perspectives. Now, I know that that in and of itself is a controversial statement, but that's my argument. There's room on this one. Yeah.
So let me help you dig ourselves out of the hole that we maybe are both making for ourselves here.
That I dug us into. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you got us into this one, but let me see if I can help. And it's a little bit funny to me because on one hand, Calvin Robinson's troubles came from being hyper clear about something, and Alistair Begg's trouble came from not being hyper clear about something. And so we are living in a time, even within the Christian world, where you can fall out of favor on both sides there. All right. So Cameron, I know the questions is going to irritate you. Who's your favorite author? You couldn't even start in on that. And anybody, like any literary person that you have ever read or listened to, would say that their least favorite question is who's your favorite author, because the question almost doesn't make sense, as if your entire formation comes through one stream of thought, or maybe you're in a band, you have the same thing. Also, like people ask me all the time, like, who's the preacher that, influences you most and you look up to? And they're looking for YouTube celebrity A, B, or C. And I'm like, well, my local preachers, like, we can't have the same favorite preacher because we don't live at the same place. But that's because and I think the healthy thing is to say, I don't eat one ingredient as my entire diet on anything. I think I did try to figure out like how long you could live on just milk and potatoes, which is surprisingly long, but that would kind of get boring after a little while.
You would do that.
And so part of the, I think part of the challenge here is to say, if you are being fed only through one IV line, and then something goes wrong with that nutrient distribution system, you're in trouble. But if you're seeing your relationship with the Lord as supplemented by a whole stream and range of other groceries, then you can. So I kind of say this about theologians, right? It's kind of like walking into a grocery store. There are many things in there that are healthy for me, and I appreciate it. There are things in a grocery store I would never buy. And a whole lot of it, I think I can produce better on my own. And so I'm necessarily picking and choosing from a variety of different resources the things that can be helpful and useful to me. And that's not because I think I'm the end all be all of this. I'm saying actually I think what Christ, so this is where a high view of scripture becomes important. If you're taking in a whole lot of stuff from a whole lot of different denominations and speakers and resources, is to say, do these people help me supplement and understand this better and make sense of it, or am I latched on them in such a way that if they have any perfection, my faith is doomed because I have a one-legged stool that I sit on and now it's broken. um and honestly, we saw that a little bit in some people's
Yeah, I
lives
think
with the collapse of RZIM. So just to be honest and
sure.
aware of
Yep.
that, of saying, can you disagree with Alistair Begg on the response that he gave and still really appreciate his preaching? I think the answer to that is yes. Can you disagree with Calvin Robinson on some of the things that he said at the Mere Anglicanism conference and still find valuable things from what he said and be challenged or encouraged by them? And I think the answer to that is yes. So as long as we're not elevating these other sources into canonical categories of authority, I think, because what people are teaching is extremely clear. So I think the structure of authority is an important part of how we think about how much emphasis and weight we want to put on who says what.
Yeah, and I think we need to be we need to understand that ministers, the people. I mean, let's say Alistair Begg is actually your pastor, or if your
So that's
pastor says something
that
like
is a different
this that
question.
you
Yeah. So that's the structure of authority thing I was bringing in.
right,
Good point.
yeah, that you deeply disagree with. So, I mean, your minister spirit exercises spiritual authority and helps to guide you in your thinking about God. But, and this is a fine distinction, they don't. And I mean, you, Nathan, and you and I are both good Protestants here. Your minister doesn't do your thinking for you.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be, because we're not precluded from weighing matters as well. I mean, this is part of what Paul is getting at when he says, work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. The minister, I mean, plays a vital role in helping you and guiding you, and yes, leading you. Nevertheless, you still must think as well and must prayerfully consider what's being said. And so, because occasionally, I mean, I hate to say it, your pastor is going to say things that you disagree with. Probably if you listen carefully to sermons and stop daydreaming, probably more often than you realize. And that's okay. See, one of the symptoms of our age is because everything's so curated for our own experience, we tend to think that we need to settle on a camp or a church or a political party where we're just going to have complete and total agreement on everything. And that's just not true of any kind of human association. Now, there are degrees of importance here, and there are matters of first importance, and theologians make these meaningful distinctions. There are matters of orthodoxy, and then there are secondary matters that are serious, but we don't need to break fellowship over them. Nathan and I baptized my babies. Nathan did not. That doesn't mean that Nathan and I don't see ourselves as, yeah, he just shakes his head, but we still worship together, when we happen to be in the same state, in the same room, in the same church. So all that to say, you've still got to, you have to have your most vital source of authority in your life is Christ. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm answerable to nobody but Jesus and all I need is my Bible and that's it, I'm fine. No,
And
we need
YouTube.
each other, we need others, and we do need spiritual, yes, and YouTube, and we do need spiritual authority, but it also means that, I mean, you have a high priest in Christ. So you still are going to have to think through what's being said, especially when it's on matters that are serious like this. I mean, this is a very serious issue that we're dealing with in our culture right now, and it's genuinely novel. It's new. In history of humanity, we have never tried to redefine marriage. Yeah, I mean, in a sense, Nathan, marriage is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we're currently trying to redefine what it means to be a person in general. So, I mean, we're just involved in all sorts of unbelievable projects these days in our culture. So, but when we face these issues, we will still have to think and pray.
Do you think,
I hope
though,
that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, so here's a question, I guess, so speaking to our general audience here, is that part of it is that all right, I'm totally speculating, and I want your legitimate thought on this, Cameron, that we've, so like, all right, let's just say it. So the denomination I'm part of here for a little while longer, has been working on thinking through a proper biblical response to this for like 40 years. And at the end of, is there a point at which at the end of the kind of a 40-year, like, oh, this is new, we got to think through how we do it. That some people are going to be like, okay, we've thought about it, and this is what we decided. It feels a little bit to me like I'm living in the moment when we can say, okay, but now we actually need to make a decision. Like after a couple of decades of trying to figure this out, we actually do need to.
Oh yes,
to draw some lines and say, okay, actually, we thought we could hold all of this together, but we can't any longer. Like these are two fundamentally separate visions of God, humanity, reality, and the relationships between the two, and we're actually going to have to draw some lines in the sand, not in a mean, bitter, culture warring, fighting way, but to say, actually, you know what, this path is leading in a direction that I don't think is what the Lord wants for me, and I'm going to, hammer my tent stakes in the ground over here and invite people into that. Not in a warring way, but just like clarity will have to arrive at some point. Like you have to lay a foundation stone in order to build something. And I don't know. It feels like in a time of some wishy-washiness on some topics that at some point we're going to have to come around and say, this is going to make me unpopular, but I'm not making this in order to be popular or unpopular. It's just what provides the most legitimate forms of stability in my relationship with the Lord, and then hopefully in the culture around me.
No, I mean, I think we're there. You're right. I mean, I was just reading a piece by George Weigel in First Things where he was making this statement about he was addressing this very issue, only he was talking about Rome. And he said, our world is awash in chaos and confusion. And you know what we're getting from Pope Francis and the church in Rome? We're getting more chaos and confusion. That's the last place we need to get chaos and confusion. And he's talking about people committing their life to the priesthood. He says, people are not going to give their lives for a giant question mark. They would give their lives for Christ, but not for a giant question mark. And that's true for so many of us right now. Yeah, we've come to the conclusion, the firm conclusion we've gained from the insights of Leslie Newbigin and others. Yes, America, North America, the West is now mission territory. Yes, it's an exotic new world. It's strange. We're adapting to it, but we're at a place now, okay, it's time to make some decisions. And, more and more Christians are saying, get ready to be the bad guy. We've talked about get ready to be weird. We need to be willing to make those decisions. And again, because our fundamental allegiance is to Christ and his kingdom. And so, that will make us look like aliens. Just at the risk of bringing in a small tangent for just a second, I know we're running out of time. One thing that does make me sad that I've hated to see it is that a lot of really gifted Christian evangelical intellectuals have tried to find, it seems to me, Nathan, have tried to find a way around this by just trying to beat up on Christians all the time and doing that in the Atlantic or doing that in the New York Times. I mean, there's just a veritable cottage industry right now. I'm not saying that we're not open to self-critique. Of course, I'm not saying that we don't need reform in some of our churches. Of course we do. Absolutely. I'm not saying there isn't a need for repentance, but all of that should go without saying. But this cottage industry of article after article about how horrible the evangelicals are here, how the Trumpists are doing this and that. And so it's very hard for me, Nathan. I no longer think it's a bad faith argument to say that a lot of these people certainly are trying to curry favor with some of the secular elites in doing this. I wasn't initially sympathetic to that reading. I thought, oh no, that's not fair. They're just giving some real heart. They're speaking prophetically. I'm not so sure I see that anymore, because if you look, and here's my case in point, one recent case in point is that Mere Anglicanism conference, which represents some of those very cool Christian voices who are all gathered there, ostensibly devoted to the mere aspect of Anglicanism and able to talk about it. And yet when somebody says something that is culturally, unpopular there, they cancel them. So it's really hard for me to see, okay, so you're okay dogging on evangelicals as long as we go after issues that are currently fashionable, like Christian nationalism, Trumpism, things like that. But if it comes to female ordination right now, suddenly, oh no, that's off the table. You can't do that. So I just think we need to, we got to get comfortable being ostracized. That's part of the territory.
Yeah. So this is a thing that I'm watching my kids have to deal with, and the church will have to deal with. So I think, yeah, let's put some names on this. So let's talk about like David French in the New York Times, for example. I think there in his mind,
he's perfect example. Yep.
There's a good-hearted attempt to want to save the faith by saying, look, this was done in the name of Christ and it has nothing to do with Christianity. And I'm standing here as a Christian in opposition to this recent sex abuse case within the Southern Baptist Convention cover-up thing that, is all over the news. I'm speaking about a specific thing there. I'm not just throwing them under the bus. That's the most recent one to go across my screen that David French wrote about. So he's trying on one hand to say, look, the gospel is good. Christ is good. The Christian life is good. Don't get distracted by this other thing. And so I'm writing in condemnation of this thing in order to preserve the dignity of Christ. Maybe he wouldn't put, that's a generalization, but let's go with that feeling. What often happens sometimes, like, my kids will get into something and the outcome is not right, or the person thought that they did the wrong thing. But I keep saying to them, so were you right? And did you do the right thing? And they'll say yes, but the other person couldn't see that or understand it. And you have to be able to say, okay, it's more important for you to do the right thing than for other people to think that you did the right thing. And that's a lesson that the church is going to have to learn here. So maybe there are people who are going to be defenders of the faith in the New York Times, but actually what the Lord is looking for is just faithful people to actually live out the vision of what he's calling them to, not to have to always worry about what the external perception of the church is. So, I mean, if you're called to that, fine, but all of us are called to living in the fullness of the vision of what Christ has for us. So I think that's the challenge of, I don't think I'll ever write anything for the New York Times, but I need to make big decisions about how I respond to certain things in my zip code, and you do too, listening to this. So, but I can't waffle on those decisions based off of what I think everybody else thinks, or do it in a way that's going to appease everybody, because it's just not going to happen. And so I think that's the heaviness of the call to discipleship when Jesus says, no one goes into battle without counting their soldiers and figuring out how big the other army is. Nobody builds a building without figuring out if they have enough money to finish it. That's part of the cost of discipleship right now, is saying, am I willing to be mocked, scorned, or frowned upon by the rest of society, even when I know that I'm doing the right thing? That's the challenge before us.
You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.